Good morning, Carlene. Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening. I would like to thank everyone for joining us for the 2020 Shipping Insights Conference, and specifically the upcoming roundtable discussion that we're about to have around decarbonization. My name is Keegan Plaskon from the American Bureau of Shipping, and I'll be the moderator for our hour-long discussion that will be starting soon. I'd like to ask Molly, could you please pull up the introductory presentation brief? First off, while that's coming online, I'd just certainly like to recognize Carlene and her team for their resilience and their willingness to transition Shipping Insights to a virtual event this year. We always anticipate and expect the industry to have such lovely events from year to year where we can collaborate and share information. Your efforts are certainly much appreciated, and we want to thank you all very much for making this happen. Before we get started with the discussion today, I would just like to take a few minutes for a safety moment, as well as we provide a high level of overview for carbon emissions reduction landscape that we're collectively facing. Next slide, please. So as you all know, we're embracing the new normal of remote working environments, and the lines that we have between our office and our homes are growing increasingly blurred. Safety certainly must continue to be a priority as the risks that we face remain very present, but of course in different forms. ABS, as a classification society and leading proponent of maritime safety, has embraced a Take 5 program to remind all of our employees and our partners about situational awareness, risk identification, and proper controls to stay healthy and safe. So whether you're doing that at work or at home, we encourage you to take 5 and be safe in all of your activities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned originally, and as you can see in your the agenda for today's kickoff day for Shipping Insights 2020, our plan is to discuss in a roundtable format IMO, decarbonization, GHG reduction, and everything that's going to happen in the next decade. The key driver behind the current decarbonization efforts really is the regulatory framework established by the IMO. Of course, there are other coalitions that are being formed and certainly other areas of collaboration. The IMO has set long-term goals and is now introducing some additional short-term measures that we will be facing well before 2030. So the long-term goals are to certainly create carbon intensity and reduce that by 40% in 2030 and as much as 70% by 2050, with a combination of 50% reduction in total GHG scores by 2050. Short-term measures are certainly aiming to accelerate the compliance with these long-term goals, and we're going to start to see some of those take effect as soon as, say, 2022, 2023, approaching design measures such as EEXI, EEDI, and other operational controls. And these will track actual carbon intensity for the vessels as we look to seek overall target fleet compliance in 2030. Next slide, please. There are certainly a range of decarbonization solutions and pathways that exist for the industry. Some are highlighted here in terms of alternative fuels, technology improvements, and operational efficiency. There are things that are available and prevalent now for the industry, although there are certain other elements that are maturing and growing, and we aim to try to investigate and promote the most viable sources and try to ensure safety and compliance at all levels. And as we move on our pathway to 2050, there may be some other elements that are less viable, but are become more realistic as we approach the 2050, not necessarily finish line, but the next generation, the next phase of our journey. Next slide, please. So with that being said, setting the groundwork for our decade of decarbonization that's coming between now and 2020 and 2030, we are pleased to be joined by a respected group of notable maritime members, including flag state representatives, owner representatives, coalition members, leading regulators, as well as third-party technical organizations. As I mentioned, my name is Keegan Plaskon from the American Bureau of Shipping. I'm joined today by Keith Dawe, employed with Cargill, but representing the Getting to Zero Coalition. Hello, Keith. Thank you for joining us. Also joined today by Jeff Lantz from the United States Coast Guard, as well as Captain Anuj Chopra from RightShip. Joined also by Kirsi Tikka, who's independent director with Ardmore Shipping and Pacific Basin Shipping. And finally, we're joined by Saverys from CMB Group. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. And with that, we're going ahead and dive into our roundtable discussion. So good morning. I hope everyone's had their cup of coffee and they're ready for some engagement. Hello, everyone. I would just ask that as you are speaking or prepared to engage, please make sure you unmute yourselves before we get going. If there are technological challenges, we will work through them as necessary. So part of my I think a good initial starting point is to maybe talk primarily with Captain Chopra. Certainly over the last year with Poseidon Principles, IMO DCS, EU MRV, and a lot of other data collection activities occurring. Data and analytics is certainly a critical element to validating fleet performance from safety standpoints, and access to that data and the transparency of it is clearly a central element. I would like to ask Captain Chopra with regards to as it relates to digital decarbonization. Do owners and other stakeholders have the type of access to digital information that to effectively achieve some of these aggressive emissions goals, or are there other forms of data that are would be nice to have or highly desirable but not yet available? We'd love to hear your views on data.
Good morning, Keegan. Thank you so much for that question. Thank you to Carleen. Thank you to SHIPPINGInsight for giving this opportunity in this August panel. Great question, Keegan. So data is key, and everybody is scrambling for correct data. Unfortunately, there's a lot of dirty data out there, which is affecting ship owners, which challenges ship owners because it does not correctly portray their vessels in the light where the commercial world wants to see them. So that is one side of the challenge. The other side of the challenge is collation of data. We did see some MOUs, some other intergovernmental organizations stop sharing data or restrict data, but that seems to be changing now. That view needs to be changing, that transparency and proactiveness needs to be coming. And so that's a very positive factor happening at this time in the industry. Another factor is ship owners themselves, vessel operators themselves. Perhaps it's one of the duties now of the vessel operators to ensure that their information out there is accurate, to identify where the data needs to be and who are keeping that data where it has a commercial impact on them, and to ensure that that data is accurately updated. Please appreciate, right from insurance companies to banks to vetting organizations, third-party vetting organizations like RightShip. This data is absolutely critical because that's how we base our decisions on. There's a continuous dialogue, and we think this transparency and relationship is going to increase. Now, specifically coming to decarbonization, the 2030 goals, we're part of many coalitions in this effort. At RightShip, we believe, the drive to zero, that we have minimum pollution anywhere, zero carbon footprint. That's where shipping needs to drive to. We see ship owners, many of them being proactive in that space, updating their data, but I think there is still need to realign and realize that the more accurate their data is, the more proactive their steps is, the better planning they have for a vessel, which is typically 25 years, give or take a few years, depending on trade, how they want to take this forward. So need for more transparency, need for more proactiveness, need for more sharing. And yes, data is king. Accurate data is king. Thank you.
Captain Chopra, thank you very much for that. kind of talking more about data and trying to better understand sort of how that data is sort of being managed and evaluated. There are clearly areas where that can be perhaps improved, certainly. And there are groups of coalitions that have formed recently, coalitions that are continuing to kind of take shape. And maybe I'd like to kind of turn to Keith to talk a little bit more about the kind of Getting to Zero coalition and sort of how those particular groups and maybe the view that you have from the Cargill position as it relates to global the Getting to Zero coalition, sort of how certain pilot projects may be emerging and sort of how you see that maybe perhaps shaping data and shaping decisions kind of moving forward.
Gladly. So thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very clear.
Great. Okay, so my name's Keith Dawe and I'm with Cargill Ocean Transportation, but I'm really here representing two groups. So the first is the Getting to Zero Coalition, and then the second is something that was mentioned earlier, the Sea Cargo Charter. So with the Getting to Zero Coalition, this is a group of around 130 ambitious, forward-looking entities from across the supply chain who are committed to getting to a commercially viable zero-carbon vessel by 2030. The reason we've set that target is that if we want to get to those ambitious IMO targets for 2050, that zero-carbon vessel has to be delivered by 2030 as an example that can be rapidly scaled up through the 2030s and 2040s. So that means the 2020s is supposed to be a decade of experimentation and pilot projects, as you were describing. So we all know that no entity can do this on their own. We also know that no group can hit the winner at the first go. So that's why we've all got to get together and see how we can do this together. So the kinds of pilot projects that I expect to see over the next decade will be in part for the new fuels. So, what is it to burn ammonia or methanol or hydrogen on board a vessel? What is it to put new technology such as a fuel cell on board the vessels? And how do we link that with what's going on in the supply chain? So for example, hotspots where hydrogen is being produced from solar or wind in the ARA area or in Australia or in other parts of the world. So in this group, we're trying to encourage the formation of the coalitions who are capable of doing those pilot projects that will lead the way as we scale up in the 2040s and 2050s. So that's quite far forward looking, but there's also the here and now, which is where we get to the Sea Cargo Charter. So the intent of this was to do for charterers and cargo owners what the Poseidon Principles were doing for the financing houses. So here what we're doing is, rather than each charterer having their own way of measuring the emissions of their voyages, we've come together and to agree a framework for assessing and making transparent those emissions. There was a comment earlier that was quite a complicated way of doing things, and there is a degree of complexity there. And that's because, to your question of data, there is an additional data set that we have to use over and above what is being used by some of the other initiatives that you mentioned. Because we are operators, because we are charterers, we have information about what cargo is on board. And that leads us to be able to measure the carbon emissions that are produced by per ton of cargo or per unit of work that the ship does. And that's the additional thing that we bring to the equation. So essentially we're using MRV style data, but we're adding that to that data about ballast legs versus laden legs, data about what the quantity of cargo that was on board, and we're trying to drive to a carbon emission per ton mile, which is the role that the charterers and cargo owners play. This is what we can impact, so this is what we're measuring.
Thank you, Keith. That's very interesting, and I definitely think that the area of collaboration and sort of joint venture and mutual partnerships is one that can serve many stakeholders in the industry quite well. I'd actually like to turn to Alex from CMB Group to kind of have him help us better understand some of those type of collaboration activities that are going on. I understand recently that CMB is working very closely with a B Hydro engine program and using some collaboration with engine manufacturers and others to sort of leverage new technology for potential emerging adoption of alternative fuels. Alex, could you kind of tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on in that realm?
Yeah, thank you, Keegan, and hi, everyone. Well, I think as has been said by many people already, we can only find solutions if we work together as ship owners, operators, shipyards, engine manufacturers, fuel suppliers. But what we need to do, and that's to Keith's point, is to start with very concrete projects. It's nice to talk about it. It's even better to do it. And that's why we have this cooperation with an engine manufacturer. That's why we see many people, many other ship owners working together with yards, with universities to develop the solutions that we will need in 2030, in 2040, 2050, but to put certain projects on the water and test them in real life.
Alex, thank you very much for the clarity sort of around the collaboration and the concrete projects that are sort of being pursued. I'd like to maybe now turn to Miss Kirsi Tikka. Hello, Kirsi. Good to see you again. Would like to kind of maybe direct some of the conversation towards another owner and owner representative, and sort of maybe look at the idea that there are certainly lessons learned to be extracted over the last, say previous decade, previous 10 years of air emissions control activities that have been going on, whether it's the integration of MARPOL Annex 6 to the use of low sulfur fuels and scrubbers and whatnot. Can you offer us maybe some perspective in terms of the next 10 years and maybe some lessons learned from the previous 10 in terms of missteps or areas that we need to really pay closer attention to as we seek to decarbonize the fleet in 2030?
Thank you, Keegan, and thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity to speak about these very important topics. I would like to emphasize that I'm on a couple of boards, but I am speaking today as an independent, and my opinions are just mine. As Keegan mentioned, there have been lots of new environmental regulations that the industry has had to deal with in the last 10 to 15 years. But if we look at where we are today, maybe some of these regulations and the challenges that we face seem like a distant memory, given that we live in this very uncertain world and in circumstances that we have very little control over. We don't know how long the pandemic is going to last. We don't know how the world looks post-pandemic. How will the world economy recover, and what will be the impact on shipping markets? So because of these unprecedented times, and also because of the pressure that we have at the same time to move to zero carbon shipping, maybe the last 10 to 15 years are not anymore such a good benchmark for us, and particularly for the actions that are needed today. And so I'd like to think about what are the areas that we do have some control over. And one of the areas that we may not feel like we have control over, but we do have more control over than many other things, is the regulatory process. And if we could come up with regulations that are credible and provide a future path, that would add a lot of certainty to this uncertain world, and I believe would provide development, both operational and technical development, that would be both safe and would encourage the right behavior. Now, having said that, as Keegan mentioned, there can be always unintended consequences from the regulatory development. And so we cannot forget that we need to keep that in mind. However, what we need today is we really need a pragmatic approach to come up with the short-term measures as soon as possible. And we may not have the final answer today. And because we don't have the final answer, we need to consider a phase-in approach that allows us to refine the procedures as technology and knowledge increases in this area. And talking about future fuels, we cannot, the development cannot really wait for the regulatory process to run its course. And for that, we need to, first of all, to have the financial incentives that many of us are talking about these days. And also we need to create a culture where the engineers and scientists who work on these future fuels and technology are encouraged to be critical and communicate openly the safety issues that might occur. And for that, we really need strong leadership to create the culture of openness. Thank you.
Kirsi, thank you very much. As always, great to hear some perspective from you. And I think you provided actually a very nice segue for Mr. Lantz from U.S. Coast Guard. Clearly, as a leading regulatory body within the world maritime community, the United States Coast Guard has a lot of influence and a lot of leadership potential around various maritime, both environmental safety type of regulatory environment. Jeff, I'd be very interested to kind of hear from your perspective in terms of sort of near and medium term leadership perspective, what the U.S. Coast Guard may be looking to do in things as near as MEPC 75 or in kind of the medium term as we get a little further down the decarbonization pathway.
Thank you, Keegan. And my thanks to Carleen and everybody who's invited me to participate in this. And interesting question. And I think to a large degree, Kirsi, I really go to what you said. From the U.S. perspective, and we all know that IMO is working very hard on coming up with some short-term measures to really address the carbon intensity to try to meet that 2030 deadline. In fact, the meeting here coming up in October, and then in November, IMO really has a goal of trying to approve the mandatory amendments to MARPOL Annex 6 with regards to GHG emission reductions. They should include both operational and technical means. So they're moving ahead quite rapidly. And I think there is an opportunity, and I think there's a great deal of hope that that the regulations are pragmatic, that we don't necessarily repeat maybe mistakes we've made in the past where the regulations were too aspirational and it was too much of a burden or difficulty for the industry to adjust. So from the US perspective, that's what we're going over to IMO with. We would like to see amendments or measures adopted that are based on data. Anuj talked about having accurate data. We think that's very important and it should be used to determine what the regulations will come out as. And then, you know, given that we think IMO probably will, from the Coast Guard's perspective, we'll need to enforce those regulations and be part of the compliance regime. And I think it's interesting, we talk about the Poseidon and we talk about the role of the charters are now entering into this. It's going to be an interesting collaboration, if you will, on the regulators trying to enforce compliance on some regulations, whereas the business side also changing the way it goes forward and how the industry would adapt. So I agree the 2020 is going to be a decade of experimentation, but I think that I think we all can agree that if we're going to meet those goals that IMO set forward, it's going to be a pretty dramatic change for shipping in the next 10, 20 years. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you very much for your comments. I guess I'd maybe just like to sort of pose an open question to the panel, kind of around the area of the coalitions and sort of the, let's just call them for all intents and purposes, maybe commercial or sort of industry type of coalitions, and how those may be operating in parallel and into the regulatory type of framework that exists, but certainly rowing in the same direction and having alignment and harmony between both of those economic incentives and the regulatory and compliance ones are certainly paramount. Does anyone here, I'd appreciate to hear your comments about potential areas of alignment or a potential misalignment that may exist as we move forward. Keith, maybe I'd like to start with you.
That's a tough one. Yeah, so when the Sea Cargo Charter was being discussed, this was a group of people who came together with high ambition. And just by way of example, one of the big topics that was discussed was whether or not we should be considering the life cycle emissions of the fuels that we use. So just to make it clear, there's a debate currently at the IMO about whether or not you just take the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced from the tank to the wake, or do you have the more expansive view of considering the well to the wake? And that has a difference for different kinds of fuels. LNG has a different kind of well to wake emission versus normal marine fuels, and very different versus biofuels, for example. The conclusion we came to was that we wanted to maintain alignment with the IMO. We wanted to stay tight with their definitions so that the industry had a chance of moving as one. So the Sea Cargo Charter is looking at tank to wake, just as IMO does. However, as that debate develops, we're certainly very optimistic that we can bring more ambition into the discussion. We're looking very closely at what the IMO is doing to see whether or not they will expand their definition. And we will be very fast followers if they do. So I think that's an example of a high ambition group that is caught in that tension of maintaining alignment with the whole industry and wishing to push ahead as fast as they can. So I'll hand that back.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Definitely aspirations are certainly a very important element, but of course, balancing that with a pragmatic approach is certainly got to be very key in a lot of the decisions that are being made. Kirsi, I guess a question that I might bounce back to you is in terms of those types of aspirations and how those might manifest themselves in more concrete terms. Can you kind of talk about what as from a ship owner perspective maybe the view on practical implementation now in terms of thinking about vessels and fleets that you might have under your control for the next 5 to 7 years, sort of how that what type of practical approach you might take in this environment?
Let me try. Well, there is so much uncertainty, as I mentioned earlier, that it's very difficult for a ship owner to know what technology to invest in today. Now, I do appreciate all these pilot programs and demonstration projects that are testing new technology and new fuels, and that's fantastic. But it's difficult for to expect a ship owner to invest large sums of money during the time that the markets are tough anyway, and putting into perspective that the ship is only a piece of this puzzle. Whatever transition we will have to go through, it will involve a lot of cost to develop the infrastructure. And I think in that sense, I do appreciate the limitation from tank to wake when looking at particularly the short-term measures. But when we are looking at the new technology and new fuels, it really begs the question, is that enough? And do we really offer the best transition for the future if we limit ourselves from tank to wake instead of from well to wake? I don't have the answer to that, but I think we need to keep in mind that it's going to cost a lot of money.
Understood. Clearly, it's very, very challenging times. I'm sorry, did somebody?
I was just going to respond to that to say certainly that the members of the Getting to Zero Coalition will wholeheartedly agree with that. The work that we're doing is very focused on full life cycle emissions. And so the search for a zero carbon vessel is a life cycle perspective on that. So yeah, we wholeheartedly agree with what you've just said there.
Thank you both. I guess maybe I might turn to Alex from CMB Group in terms of other types of technology and other projects. Can you sort of talk a little bit about how hydrogen it sort of is playing into maybe more of a longer term strategy that CMB Group is entertaining? Is that maybe one of several types of aspirational projects that you all are investigating?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think for us in the very short term, we believe that hydrogen can be a solution for smaller ships. We believe in green ammonia as a solution for our larger ships. But what we also believe is that we will need two developments. The sea cargo and Poseidon principle development is basically our customers telling us and our banks telling us, if you want to do business, you need to become more efficient. You have to operate more modern vessels, and eventually you will have to operate low carbon vessels. I think that's a very big step forward because at the end of the day, I will do what my customer wants. The second big development that we will need is the price of carbon. It's very nice to transport things with a battery ship or with a hydrogen ship, but if nobody pays sufficient amounts of money to justify my investment, that will not be a very long story. And as we know, in shipping, we are already hit by huge cycles. We're hit by geopolitics and a lot of external events. So on top of that, this whole carbon debate is adding a tremendous amount of cost. So pricing carbon, putting a price on carbon will definitely assist us to transition away from carbon fuels to zero carbon fuels. I think there's a lot of discussion going on right now. Eventually, we will need to find a global solution. And I think everybody will agree in this panel, shipping is global by nature. I'm based in Europe. You know, in Europe, there's a big discussion about the shipping being included in the ETS scheme, which is a good idea, i.e. putting a price on carbon, which is a very bad idea, just putting it in a regional context. We have to do this on a global level. But if you combine our customers telling us, for instance, through the Sea Cargo Charter, the banks telling us through the Poseidon principles, and on top of that, some kind of international mechanism that puts a price on carbon. If you combine these three, I am sure ship owners will develop solutions and will put ships that are zero carbon on the water much faster than everybody might think. Because it only takes us 2 years to build a ship. And I can guarantee you, if we can make money, we'll do it.
Alex, thank you very much for your input there. Certainly looking at coalitions and collaboration, I guess one area of interest that I might sort of highlight and point out and present to the group for discussion is that at least at the initial stages, the majority of participants, at least from the charter standpoint, have been around the sort of bulk commodities. Do we see any predictions for future expansion of similar types of coalitions involving other leading charters, maybe in the container or in the particularly oil markets? Is that something that might be a next logical step, or do you envision that we may have some holdouts as moving towards 2030?
I think if I just may, on the container side, I think the customers of the container operators are going to push us to do it because that's consumer goods. It's very close to the end user, the end consumer, and they are asking now to have zero carbon products in the supermarkets. So I'm sure the IKEAs and Walmarts of this world are going to push the container lines to do something.
Indeed, of course, it will take a tremendous amount of data to be able to transmit that information through the supply chain, and so that the end consumers can see exactly what the carbon footprint of the new shoes that they just bought, or the groceries that they're particularly getting, which will certainly be instrumentally important.
Keegan, if I may add, completely agree with Alex and Kirsi. I think it has to be a global solution, and we need to understand that all the shipping as a service operates under a social license. And the focus of that social license of our stakeholders is towards ESG. And that's really where all of this is driving at. What's really refreshing today is that the banks, the insurance companies, the big charterers are putting in money, are finding resources where, as highlighted by Kirsi, that the markets by the ship owner themselves do not have the financial capability to understand how to lay out for a 15 or a 20-year projection on the market. But it is the users of shipping, the drivers of shipping, the customers of shipping who are now in the driver's seat and providing those resources for that research to go. But a global solution is the only way. Otherwise, we'll create a regulatory nightmare, which then we will scratch our heads about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your perspective there. I guess maybe another question that I might pose as we sort of continue our dialogue is around the issue of sort of integrating particular new members into coalitions, or coalitions that are being formed by groups that are not necessarily traditionally related to shipping. From your individual perspectives, have you all seen any kind of sort of groundswell effort, or any particular groups of participants who are looking at shipping in a way that they had not necessarily priorly considered? Keith, have you seen any groundswell effort in that regard?
Yeah, for sure. So that's actually been one of the most exciting things about the last year or so with Getting to Zero Coalition. Is it's not just shipping. We have, for example, a wind turbine power company in the mix. We have a fertilizer company in the mix. So they're there because they want to know how they get a green electron to the propeller, or they want to learn how their skill set in working with ammonia can be applied in shipping. Those are just two examples of people, entities beyond the normal world of shipping being attracted to what we're doing here because of the efforts that we're making in decarbonisation. And then I would go a step further, which is that there's a broader coalition of entities who are tackling what are known as hard to decarbonise sectors, and kind of looking over each other's shoulders as we learn from each other as we try and attack the decarbonisation problem in our own industry. So I think you find the aviation industry, for example, and the road transport industry kind of peeking over it in each other's shops as we're trying to learn from each other as we rise to this challenge. So certainly new people in the conversation.
That's fantastic. Other types of movements and activities that have certainly are taking shape is, as you mentioned, offshore wind energy, and offshore wind continues to be a growth sector. It's still very much emerging here in North America, but continues to kind of surge forward. We have at least heard in the news about leading traditional shipping companies who have decided to maybe investigate shifting away from their more traditional types of formats into wind energy and pursuing those type of fundamental shifts away from traditional types of business. Do you and then you even mentioned, Keith, the idea that charterers through the Sea Cargo Coalition are starting to look at the data itself from particular cargo types and maybe the carbon footprint of those cargo types relative to the trade routes and sort of the extraction process and sort of its overall footprint. I wonder how these what types of other transitions may be fundamental within the industry, and how traditional shipping companies may look to reinvent themselves in certain ways, given these particular market pressures or sort of new opportunities. Are there particular does anyone who's maybe a ship owner or a charterer here have any views on sort of how shipping companies may sort of reinvent themselves, or how charterers may look to marine transportation in sort of a new way, given these certain market pressures and regulatory pressures that are present?
Well, Keegan, if I may, I consider ourselves as being a traditional ship owner, but maybe we will not be traditional in a couple of years from now. Had you told me 5 years ago that I would be building a tugboat with a hydrogen engine, that I would be building 2 crew transfer vessels with hydrogen engine, and that I would have launched a hydrogen tractor with Case New Holland last week, I would probably have told you you're crazy. But we're doing it. And it is just to show how quickly things go. A company like mine, which is 125 years old, which has been in traditional shipping for over a century, is now looking at all kinds of different applications with different fuels. And it's happening very, very fast. So by nature, I'm very optimistic, but I think we're definitely not the only ones. You were hinting at some examples of our peers. I think a lot of people are looking into this energy transition. And I'm very hopeful that in 10 years from now, our industry will be totally different.
Keegan, if I may add, I think you asked about tankers and I forgot to mention it earlier. So we have a large number of tanker customers who are exactly in the space where the dry bulk market is. They're very much bothered about their carbon accounting, their carbon footprint, and they are working towards reducing their carbon footprint. So it's right across the industry. It's not just one side of it. And we are seeing increasingly awareness and, more important, demand that they want carbon accounting. They want to measure what their carbon footprint is and then take active steps to do this. So we are seeing this happen right across the board.
Thank you very much. Kirsi, did you have something you'd like to add? I noticed your hand.
Yeah, I'd like to just bring to the discussion the approach that can be used to evaluate where the company is. And I think the using an ESG approach can be a good way to do that, where ESG approach is really very integral to the sustainability of a company. And it has to be integrated into the strategic planning and operational planning. And the way to do that would be to come up with the approach is sort of a risk management approach, where you first identify the risks and opportunities that are related to ESG. And these can be financial risks, they can be operational risks, or they can be reputational risks. And then when you identify the issues, you evaluate which ones are really important to the company and which ones are important to the stakeholders. And then you take these important material issues and incorporate into your strategic planning and operational planning. And then, of course, to be able to manage this approach, you need to have targets and measurements. You monitor them and you report on them and provide transparency. And then finally, of course, it's a living approach. And so you need to have continuous improvement, because not any company there's no one solution for each company. And so you need to have like a methodology that you can use to approach these issues.
Agreed. Thank you very much for your input. I guess one topic of interest that I was curious to kind of learn from you all, and maybe our audience members as well may be interested, is that as the push to decarbonization and energy optimization on vessels continues, clearly that will apply all kinds of pressure on vessel design and altering vessel design and making those vessels more efficient, ultimately reducing maybe cost of construction, changing the life cycle considerations. We're still operating under a very traditional approach of you build a vessel, you design a vessel, its intended lifespan is 20 or 25 years, and that's the economic turnaround, and it costs this amount of money, but maybe there's a different model that could potentially be adopted. And maybe an unintended consequence of that may be the idea of the rise of autonomous type of shipping, where removing certain high degree of manpower could help assist possibly with trimming vessel consumption, energy consumption, and that type of thing. And maybe a question that I might pose to the Coast Guard from a regulatory standpoint is, how prepared are we as an industry in terms of the sort of integrating not just one, but maybe multiple types of technological changes that need to happen simultaneously in order to achieve some of these larger energy and sustainability goals? Is that something that the Coast Guard or other flag states are actively considering as an issue?
Thanks, Keegan. Yes, I think we are. We're engaged with IMO on the autonomy issue right now, and really, our goal here as a regulator is to try to make sure that we don't have any regulations that are standing in the way of employing technology as we see fit to meet the needs of the industry and as society demands. But I think if you listen to everybody here, which is quite intriguing, and the driving force being the business side, the money, the customers, the charters. I think that really is what would be driving whether they go to autonomy or not. But I think there's opportunity there, and of course, us as the regulators make sure that we don't get in the way and allow that technology to develop and to be used in a positive manner. Thanks.
That's certainly great input. Thank you very much, Jeff. As we, I guess I might just take a short break and just ask our Shipping Insights moderator, now that we're kind of about 10 minutes to the top of our meeting, if there have been any questions from our audience members. I know that this is a live session and we're being viewed by a large cadre of participants. Molly, are we receiving any incoming questions from audience members? Okay, I guess maybe if those are coming in, we'll maybe address those closer to the end or certainly afterwards. I guess a next question that I have is kind of coming back to RightShip. Captain Chopra, could you maybe expand for our listeners? Are there any kind of new programs or initiatives that we might expect to see coming out of RightShip? Certainly, the GHG scoring and safety scoring have been front and center from RightShip here in the past year or so. What are some new types of initiatives and programs that we might expect from your organization?
Thank you so much, Keegan. Thank you for that opportunity. So we reached out to all our stakeholders and industry to get feedback as to where they wanted RightShip to be. And we've taken that feedback to heart. So whether it's the safety score, the extra transparency, the more collegial atmosphere, or working very closely with industry in that space. And we believe that not only is the actual operation of the vessel, where the safety score is concerned, it's not only the ESG side of it, which has an impact on the vessel's risk. It's not only the seafarer's wellness and well-being that has an impact on safety. So we believe that all these factors have an impact on the vessel's operational risk and operational safety, and shipping as general to its users. So we're working on all those areas. We are gradually testing them, rolling them out, extensive internal and external testing with stakeholders, with industry, as we get their feedback, because these are new steps. These are different to what has been in the industry. And we're working very closely with a lot of ship owners, operators, charterers to roll these out. And that's really where we are heading at this time.
That's fantastic. I think you certainly, it's important to mention mariner wellness. These have been exceptionally trying times here in 2020. I think for all of the crew members, the officers and crew on vessels globally who've been on ships maybe a little bit longer or much longer than they had originally expected. And we've asked quite a bit of them as an industry. And we certainly are hoping that they're continuing to stay safe and operate at the highest level of professionalism. So thank you very much for your input. We did receive several questions from the audience, and now that we have a few extra minutes, I will go ahead and pose those. We have a question from the audience, actually directed to Keith, as to the recent Global Maritime Forum report. Are you aware of, or could you comment on sort of the why that report may or may not have mentioned wind assist technology to any degree? Is that something you could comment on?
I don't know the specific reference in that report, but I think wind-assisted propulsion is going to be very important. We all know that any of the future fuels that will get us to zero will be significantly more expensive than the fuels that we use now. So anything that we can do to reduce the amount of fuel that we use on a voyage is a good thing. But there's no amount of energy efficiency that will get you to zero. There's no amount of energy efficiency that will get you to the kinds of decarbonization that we're looking for by 2050. So I apologize for not knowing the exact reference, but it's a question that often comes up around how getting to zero relates to energy efficiency, and that's what's underlying the general position on that.
Thank you very much, Keith. I appreciate that. Certainly, in some of the work that ABS has done, and certainly other class societies, I'm sure have necessarily seen this in certain sustainability studies and EEXI benchmarking types of activities. That while energy efficiency technologies, either category A or B or C, can be transformative and can be layered in many ways, that the gains achieved by any one particular technology may be necessarily modest in nature, and that some of the larger energy efficiency achievements are really through, at least at this stage, through engine performance limitation and sort of engine adjustments. And of course, that would speak to maybe the more long-term solution may not be in terms of simple EET type of implementations with the same traditional types of marine fuels. It's really that sort of a bridging, sort of a transitional period where we're able to shift from the traditional carbon-based marine fuels into other more efficient, less impactful marine fuels, and that of course those EETs, the most effective ones, may continue to live on and be with us in the next 10 or 15 years, wind included. So I think the maritime industry relied on wind in its heyday for a very long time, and as an effective propulsion means. So not to say that we wouldn't adopt that as fully, but certainly some room there. I had an interesting comment from an audience member. Keith, thank you very much for your input on a slightly different topic. An audience member was sort of asking with regard to end consumers and sort of that pressure being placed on the final consumer, whether that's an agricultural consumer, a industrial consumer, or even a sort of personal consumer for personal goods. That largely with the internet and information technology that's available, the views and the likes and desires and the wants and needs of those particular consumers in this day and age are able to be transmitted very strongly through social media and through other channels to affect change, whether it's a social change, an economic change, an environmental type of change, and it may be very interesting to see how those influences will impact the goods and services that are being provided by a low carbon or no carbon transportation system. I think the example that the audience member wrote in was the idea that Walmart and Target and their consumers have the ability in some cases to alter content or request publishers to alter content of types of materials that are provided in their stores based on the wants and needs of those consumers. And in much the same way, it'd be very interesting to see how the products and services provided by the maritime industry are effectively shaped in a similar fashion. But largely, of course, the economic influences at this scale are probably the leading factors there. I guess before we wrap up, I would certainly like to just kind of open the floor for Kirsi, Jeff, Keith, Anuj, Alex, do any of you have any particular questions that you'd or topics that you'd like to broach to one another, or particular final closing comments?
I have a question, and I was really intrigued by the business side, how it's driving from Alex and Keith, and I was just wondering on their perspective how the motivation from the business side should interact with the regulatory side, make sure that we come up with a system that works all together and not at cross purposes. And so if they had any input on that, I think that might be very interesting to hear, because as a regulator, if I didn't have to write one regulation and the business took care of it, that would be the ideal life. So I just trying to, maybe they have some input on that, and I'd be interested in hearing. Thank you.
Perhaps I'll go first. It's a tough question. Sorry, am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Hear me. So some maritime activities very close to the end consumer. So think of a finished product in a box that's going to the end consumer. The end consumer can really drive the demand for how that product is delivered. But there's other maritime activity that is very far from that. So think of the ton of iron ore that's not yet steel, that's not yet a billet, that's not yet a car. It's very, very far from the end consumer. So there's one story that says that long journey to the end consumer will be closed with things like the Sea Cargo Charter. And then if you think of better, perhaps blockchain style carbon accounting that will allow the end consumer know how that was delivered, maybe that will be a positive driving force in the industry. But that's a big maybe. So I think if you talk with most people in the industry, they tend to feel the need for a strong regulation to deliver an ambitious level playing field that will allow the folk who are on the call now to get on and invest in the future that we know that the industry needs.
Keegan, just wanted to add on that. I was going to say the social license, the social equity side of it, the ESG side of it, that's what's driving this. Pleased to inform we have customers who actually offset all their shipping emissions by buying carbon offsets. That awareness is there in the customer, and we have them testing for voyages. So we see this area expanding and exploding in a big time, where the ultimate consumer dictates how a service provider provides that service to them in different segments of the market. It's stretched, it's all over the place, but that awareness is coming, and that's where the dollars are. Thank you.
Keegan, I'd like to add to this that I totally agree with what Keith and Anuj said, but I think it's a combination of regulations and commercial incentives, because we need a level playing field, and that's what the regulations are for. But we shouldn't just over-regulate the industry. We need commercial incentives so that the regulations offer the foundation.
Fantastic comments, everyone. We're at the, unfortunately, we are at the end of our hour. This has been a fantastic morning of exchange of ideas and discussion. I want to thank each of you for participating today on Monday for this call with and roundtable with Shipping Insights. I'm Keegan Plaskon from ABS signing off. ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. And I guess with that, we'll hand back to Carleen.